Luis Borges, in his works, will reference Franz Kafka a number of times, and he actually has an essay titled specifically Kafka and His Precursors, in which he is going to identify 6 precursors of Kafka and say some very interesting things about what it means to be a precursor. And we might say we could begin with this naive idea in asking this question, well, what is a precursor? That, literary history, or really the history of any sort of art form, is rather linear. What happens before doesn't necessarily determine what comes after, but it opens certain channels. It suggests certain themes or forms or ways of going about things. So we could say, for example, Stephen King identifies himself as a horror author in this lineage that begins with Edgar Allan Poe, who then leads in some way to H.P. Lovecraft, who then leads in some way to Stephen King. And Poe would be a precursor of Lovecraft. Lovecraft would be a precursor of King. None of them determine each other, but we could say, well, they show a path forward. They suggest some things which then the other person picks up and, as we say, runs with. And how do they become a precursor? Well, it just happens through history, right? Somebody does something and somebody else comes along and says, that's kind of neat. I'll do something along the same lines and do something new with that. Borges is not actually buying that notion. And so we have to go kind of to the end in order to reveal his point of view. And he's using Kafka as, we might say, a case study for this. So at the very last part, he's going to say, the fact is, each writer creates their precursors. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going backwards in time and somehow, this author who is clearly influenced by this author made that first author come into existence. No, there's something else going on there. But to identify them as precursors, you can only do that afterwards. And he says the author's work in the present modifies our conception of the past as it will modify the future. And here he's actually going to reference T.S. Eliot's points of view. And so he says, in this correlation, the identity or plurality of men matters not at all. And we'll come back to that. But there is another thing that he says that's really quite interesting. So could we think of an author who has a substantial body of work, so early Kafka, later Kafka, as the early Kafka as the precursor of the later Kafka? Borges actually says, well, yes, but there's a difference in degree. The first Kafka of Betrachtung, his first collection of short stories, is less a precursor of the Kafka of the shadowy myths and atrocious institutions than is Browning or Lord Dunsany. So some other people are more precursors for who that later Kafka is going to be, the Kafka of the trial, the Kafka of the castle, of some of the other stories as well. So let's look at the people who Borges identifies, and we'll come back to this theme. And before that, though, he says, once I planned to make a survey of Kafka's precursors. At first, I thought he was as singular as the fabulous phoenix. When I knew him better, I thought I recognized his voice or his habits in the texts of various literatures and various ages. I shall record a few of them here in chronological order. So clearly, there could be more precursors to Kafka. So the first is Zeno's paradoxes of movement in chronological order. Of course, that's going to be preceding because Zeno is a pre-Socratic philosopher, right? And what are the paradoxes of movement? They all involve going part of the way there, but not the entire way, and then having to traverse another distance, which is usually half the amount, and you can never actually get there from here. Now, they are paradoxes, and there are ways out of them. So he says, a moving body on A will not be able to reach point B because before it does, it must cover half the distance, and before that, half of the half, all the way to infinity. Now, how is that related to Kafka? The formula of this famous problem is exactly that of the castle. And the moving body and the arrow and Achilles and the tortoise are the first Kafkian characters in literature. So he's saying Zeno is actually writing literature here. Now, it's preserved through Aristotle, as Borges notes. Then we get a text out of Chinese literature. The second text that happened to come to my attention, the affinity is not of form, but rather of tone. It's an apologue by Han Yu, a prose writer of the 9th century, and it's included in the admirable Anthologie raisonnée de littérature chinoise by Margulis. And so here's the paragraph that he brings up. It is universally admitted that the unicorn is a supernatural being and one of good omen. This is declared in the odes and the annals and the biographies of illustrious men and in other texts of unquestioned authority. Even the women and children of the populace, so ignorant people, know that the unicorn constitutes a favorable presage. But this animal is not one of the domestic animals. It is not always easy to find. It does not lend itself to classification. It is not like the horse or the bull or the wolf or the deer. And therefore, we could be in the presence of the unicorn and we would not know for certain that it is one. We know that a certain animal with a mane is a horse and one with horns is a bull. We do not know what the unicorn is like. Right? So again, that's kind of Kafka-esque. There's a similarity there. And then he jumps into somebody who, they're considered part of a vast existentialist movement. But it's interesting the way that Borges is going to bring together Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish theologian and pseudonymous writer, and Kafka. So he says, the mental affinity of both writers is known to almost everyone. So the fact that they have certain things in common. But what has not been brought out is that Kierkegaard, like Kafka, abounded in religious parables on contemporary and middle-class themes, and he brings up two that Lowry, in his Kierkegaard, mentions. One is the story of a forger who examines Bank of England notes while under constant surveillance. In the same way, God must have been suspicious of Kierkegaard and must have entrusted him with a mission simply because he knew he was accustomed to evil. Expeditions to the North Pole are the subject of the other, and this, I think, is pretty well known. Danish clergymen had announced that to participate in these expeditions would be beneficial for the eternal salvation of the soul, but they admitted it was quite difficult, and not everyone could undertake such an adventure. So they announced that any journey from Denmark to London, say by ship, was in fact a real expedition to the North Pole. Now, Borges doesn't tell us which parables in Kafka these correspond to, but you could say, yes, these are kind of similar to what goes on in Kafka's works. Then the fourth, he says, is found in this poem, Fears and Scruples, by Browning. A man has, or thinks he has, a famous friend. He's never seen this friend, and the latter has not yet been able to help him, but he's reputed to have very noble qualities, and letters he's written are circulated. Some question his good qualities, and handwriting experts assert that the letters are apocryphal. In the last verse, the man asks, what if this friend happened to be God? Again, something kind of parabolic there. And we might think of the judgment, right, as something parallel, not completely, but similar to that among Kafka's works. Then he talks about two, indeed, parallel stories, two short stories, one by Léon Bloy, a very interesting author, his Histoire des Obligeantes, and talks about people who have a collection of atlases, globes, train schedules, and trunks and then die without ever having left the town where they were born. The other is Lord Dunsacy's story entitled Carcassonne, and an invincible army of warriors departs from an enormous castle, subjugates kingdoms, sees monsters, conquers deserts and mountains, but never arrives at Carcassonne, though the men catch sight of the city once from afar. And Borges tells us the story is the exact opposite of the other one. In the first story by Léon Bloy, the city is never departed from. In the second, the city is never reached. And he says, if I'm not mistaken, all of these heterogeneous selections I have mentioned resembles Kafka's work. Now here's where it gets more interesting. If I am not mistaken, not all of them resemble each other, and this fact is the significant one. So why? Kafka's idiosyncrasy, what it is that makes him Kafka, in greater or lesser degree, is present in each of the writings, but if Kafka had not written, we would not perceive it. That is to say, it would not exist. So the poem Fears and Scruples is like a prophecy of Kafka's stories, but our reading of Kafka refines and changes our reading of that poem. Browning did not read that poem as we read it now. And he says the word precursor is indispensable in the vocabulary of criticism, but we should purify it from every connotation of polemic, fighting with people, or rivalry. Right? It's something different, and this is where he returns to saying each writer creates his precursors. And by that thing in the present, we can look back at the past and see it differently. Now, I will also say as I close this, there is a story, right, where one of the characters positioned by Borges, described by Borges, Pierre Menard, is writing portions of the Don Quixote, the same book that Cervantes wrote, but this is by Menard, and it's a different book in the description in that story because it's read from the vantage point of the present. Something similar is going on here with how we read these things, including philosophical matters like Zeno's paradoxes, from the vantage point of recognizing the Kafkaesque within each of them.